Chương trình tiếng Anh dành cho đồng bào Việt Nam ở trong Tổ quốc. Hello, Professor John Balaban. Welcome.
Hello again.
Hello. Thank you very much for allowing us to be with you again. And continuing with yesterday's interview, we would like to go back so the other participants in the course can listen to your wonderful stories and tales of Kiều and Hồ Xuân Hương. But why don't we start from the beginning? We would like to hear from you what prompted your interest in Vietnam, especially in the Vietnamese pre-modern Nom, Han Nom poetry. And then please tell us a little bit about the Nom Foundation, the meanings and the achievements of such. And thank you. Please.
Right. Well, I went to Vietnam in 1967. The war was still going on, and I had volunteered to go because I was opposed to the war. And I went to work for civilian agencies that first sent me to teach linguistics at the Đại học Cần Thơ, and that ended when the university was bombed during the Tet Mao Ton. Then I went to work for a group of doctors who treated war-injured children. I brought them to the United States, the hospitals here, and then I returned them to their families when they were well enough. And that led me to Kazao. I would hear it in the countryside. I had no idea what it was, but I was fascinated. And then I returned with a tape recorder on a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and recorded Kazao in the countryside. That led me to Hồ Xuân Hương. And since she wrote in Chu Nom, that led me to wanting to know about Chu Nom. And since she and Nguyen Dzu both wrote in Nom, and since they are contemporaries of the same political time, that led me further into creating a foundation. And the foundation, to continue, was begun 20 years ago. And we wanted to preserve, by digital means, everything that was rotting away in libraries in Vietnam or in old houses where people saved manuscripts. We wanted to copy them, put them on the internet, and make them available to anybody with access to a computer anywhere in the world. And so we did that. We did the collection of Han Nom at the National Library in Hanoi, and we helped the library in Ho Chi Minh with some of their projects. We also helped digitize the text at 2 Buddhist temples.
So, as I mentioned yesterday, and a bit of introduction again. So, to give a little background to the watchers later, that I represent a group of adult learners, 12,000 adult learners learning English. I'm leading the course, and this is the interview with you is part of the American exposure that I would like to give to the course participants. We start out with people who are connected to Vietnam, committed to Vietnam, who are passionate about all things U.S. Vietnam related, and it's a great honor to have you with us. We are very honored to bring a little support to the foundation, and we are committed to continuing our support to the work of American and Vietnamese scholars who come together to work on Nome and the preservation of it. Now, another question that I started yesterday: what is do you quốc ngữ when it with the emergence of it, the emergence of quốc ngữ actually eradicated pretty much Nôm and Han, the whole Sino-Vietnamese legacy. And now people, modern Vietnamese like myself and many of our participants here, who do not have the understanding of that past Nôm and Han, we have a problems with understanding our own names. For example, I don't know what my names, each of the characters or each of the word, the sound means, but I do know that they all have a meaning in the old Chinese characters. Do you feel like there are a lot of things for us modern Vietnamese to learn as treasure hunters? What would be? Is it a loss that we lost touch with our past, a few hundred years of Nôm, and should we go back? What are the benefits for us to go back and look through it?
If you can access a computer, all you need to know is quốc ngữ, and you could go to, say, our website, and we have a dictionary. If you want to find out the characters for your name and what your name means, we can provide that, or you can provide it to yourself. So things like that, which are not small, but also major works of history, a royal decree of poetry, of course, which is why I got interested. But for instance, politically, the ownership of the Spratly and Paracel Islands that are of concern in the Eastern Sea. In the ancient texts, there are records of the emperor sending out ships to claim them for Vietnam. Around 1500, I think, is the date. So in Hanoi, Sino-Vietnamese, there's a lot of material that's important for Vietnamese. For me, because I was interested in Kazao, there are scholars from 2 centuries ago who were writing Kazao down in Chu Nom. So there's just a huge cultural heritage that belong to Vietnamese, but also, in some sense, belong to the whole world, as it traces human consciousness in Vietnam, which is a long, long period, right?
Yes. So, yeah, it does sound like it makes a lot of sense for us to go back and look deep down back, through the history and to learn from the many centuries of wisdom being recorded in the Nome. And yesterday you mentioned that Vietnam is not the only, or not a very unique culture in the way that we lose touch with our history and traditional culture through the by losing a script. You were mentioning that Dante and some other classical Western poets and writers who actually chose to write in their own languages at the time. So can you elaborate somewhat on that again? The disconnected, the disjoint between the modern person and the history.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between Chu Nom and Chinese is that Chu Nom represents Vietnamese speech, the same speech everybody is talking today. And why would you want a poetry of your language in a different language? You want it in your own language. So Chaucer in the 1300s wrote in English for the first time. He should have been writing in French. That was the court in London of the time, writing in French. Dante should have been writing in Latin, not Italian, but he used the Demotic script, the language of everybody, when he wrote his famous work. So these are powerful infusions of culture that you don't want to lose touch with.
Yes.
Does that make sense, or am I?
It makes great sense. I just wanted to, and yesterday I learned, or more accurately, you reminded me that Gnome, as an instrument of recording thơ, actually went all the way back to Nguyễn Trãi, to the 15th century, and he actually wrote a lot of his poems in Gnome, right? So
Right.
yeah, so it was a
What
bit.
is Cookam T-Top is what
Yeah.
is that collection, and our foundation just helped fund a book about the vocabulary that Nguyen Trai used in that particular book.
Quốc âm Thủy Tập. That's right. Yeah. So now let's talk a bit about Hồ Xuân Hương and how the Western audience would receive her. Again, I wanted to mention that we have a lot of young kids in the class, but I don't want to lose the chance to listen from you about how you dealt with in the translation that you very expertly produce, and which made you famous when President Clinton quoted you when he visited Vietnam, I would say 20 some years ago. And I was there during the meeting and the visit. But all the things that she was famous for, the entente double, the double meanings of everything, the euphemism, the sexual connotation, all of that. How in this modern light of this modern time, how do we view her? How should we interpret this rebellious and very unique, wonderful woman, and very talented as such as well?
She had a huge appeal here in the United States. I think people saw her as a feminist. They liked how immensely clever she was in her poetry and in dealing with the powerful men of her period. For me, the poetry is fairly amazing. I think people mostly, when you say her name, you had a smile on your face. When you say Xuân Hương, usually people smile because they're thinking of the poems with double entendre, with double meanings, right? Yeah. But even her religious poems, her Buddhist poems, have double meanings cleverly used.
Yeah.
And I was saying yesterday there was a French psychologist who said that she had a psychosexual malady.
Yeah.
I think that's a very limited view of who she was. I think she was actually a relative of Nguyen Huệ. She was part of the Taishan.
Yeah.
One of her husbands, she was a Vaulé. One of her husbands was beheaded by the emperor.
Yeah.
After that Taishan rebellion was crushed.
Yes.
So her beliefs in who holds power, the condition of women, these are very appealing notions. And in the naughty things that she said just made her even more attractive.
That's right. And yesterday you mentioned that in your translation, and again, that was something new that I just learned about một đèo lại một đèo. That really was something that I never expected. I really never thought it was an euphemism until you pointed it out yesterday. And so when translating that kind of cleverness, those puns, do you kind of have a smile on your face just reading all of those? So you go back and do you learn a lot more about Hồ Xuân Hương from time to time?
I learn it, especially if I'm with a Vietnamese audience, as I have been with the book. Say, I said yesterday in San Jose, but other places too, and that audience is fairly well read, and they like the idea that an American even tried to get this right, and so they're not hesitant to correct me if I didn't get things right, and I find that useful. Pointing out, especially what's the phrase, noi loi, I can't
Nói
remember.
lái, nói lái. Yeah.
No lie.
Yeah.
That I missed, that I didn't see were there. I remember there was a Vietnamese ambassador to the United States who was helping me. And Tran Van Zin, I don't know if you know the name even,
Yeah.
departed. And so I'd call him up on the phone and I said, I just don't know what to do with this line. And I said, what's this word mean here? And he started laughing on the telephone. And he said, Balaban, you're finally getting it. He said, that's a double meaning. And then he explained it to me how it was. So in Vietnamese, you can say Dale.
Yeah.
As in the, or you can say Dale, or you can say Dale with a high rising tone.
Yeah.
And she knows her audience knows that. She never uses bad language. But she understands that the audience will pick it up with their ear, the echo.
Yeah, very clever, and we should go back and check her out more. Now that I have, or we have spoken with you, so I would like to devote the second part about to Nguyễn Du and his worldview, his human perspective. And especially reflected through the life of Kiều. Was Nguyễn Du a copycat? Did he simply go out to pick up like some cheap novel or novella from China? Someone had bought it on the trip to China, and he picked it up and he simply, as a pastime, just try to cleverly moved it into the couplets, the lục bát, the sáu tám, or was he trying to say something? Was he does he have like a deep agenda? Was he a Nabokov of the old time?
I think of him that way.
Yeah.
He picked up a 16th century novel, and there are characters in it like Tu Hai. He changed that character dramatically from a sea pirate to somebody who in fact is a revolutionary hero but has flaws. And those flaws go to this consideration of being controlled by passion, by one's own passions, which is Thuy Kio's flaw too. How does she deal with it? What is resignation? What's the notion of no, basin, a debt for 3 incarnations, what's the notion of Zuyin? How do they affect this notion, and how does passion interfere with those obligations to heaven? So yeah, he made this a much more important work. He made it not just a cheap novel, but he tweaked the characters and he showed even when he has us admire Tu Hai. Nonetheless, he's flawed, and under the face of heaven, he fails finally. And Thuy Kio comes to reckon with that as well, about herself.
Yesterday you recited the first few lines of Kio. That when I asked you what would be your most favorite verses or couplets in Kio, and you recited the first 8 lines. I would ask you to please, if you have it around, if you can read it, read them out again, and then let's talk about his why he would start out, such an important work, such a with those lines, and what was he trying to say, and how would the Western audience that you have come into contact with? I know you taught Kio to American students. And why would those themes in Nguyễn Du's Kio be well received by these Western scholars?
Well, they're universal themes, and they have to do with where one finds comfort, where does one place trust, and if Troy, if heaven is really watching us, or how can we change our fate? Does heaven care about us individually? Where do we find strength? And of course, these are powerful, powerful things. So the very beginning that you mentioned, and here's a translation that I did. In the long span of a human life, When Zeus has 100 years, in the 100 years.
Yes.
In the long span of a human life, our talents, our struggles against our fate. Just as mulberry trees grow where the sea once surged. Strange things come to pain our hearts. Strange but no surprise, since heaven likes to torment those with beauty, not talent. I think I lost you. Your picture anyway. It says admin here. Are you?
Okay, I know there's someone
Okay,
someone was okay. One of the participants just came through, but anyway, I muted her. Yeah, yeah. So there is a sense of social justice, and then there's a theme of loneliness that I find in the book of Kiều. Nguyễn Du was lonely in his time. He didn't really know who or where to turn to. But then we also talked about how Kiều had a happy ending, which you said that your student didn't think so.
It's a kind of romance ending. That's the only part of the novel. They wanted her to be happy and to be married again. And of course, she had gone beyond that. You know, she had become a prostitute. She had suffered intensely. She had many male lovers. And she had this searching for heaven. She was always looking up to heaven for some kind of sign, some kind of indication of her protection. And it was through Buddhism that she reconnected with herself. And that is the interesting part of the story. We talked about this yesterday. Herself is a very complex creature. She's not just one self, but in a previous incarnation, she is the figure
Đạm Tiên. Yeah.
And then that ghost comes and talks to her a couple times. And once when Kiều tries to commit suicide, heaven intervenes and will not permit that. And the ghost tells her, I will come and meet you at the Chin Thang River.
Yeah.
And that's where she tries to commit suicide. When she's pulled out of the river and still is alive, the person that she meets is a Buddhist nun who's been looking after her and is worried about her. The suggestion in the story, I think, is that this is all the same soul, that in a previous life, less perfected than she is in this life, Thuy Kiều was Đạm Tiên. In a future life, more perfected than she is in this life, she'll become
Giác Duyên. Yeah, Giác Duyên. Okay, so you're right. It's again, this is a dimension that I never thought about. That how it relates back to the concept of Nợ Ba Sinh. So there were 3 lives that we saw of Kiều, 3 incarnations of Kiều. So then again, it follows that we actually have a reason to believe that she will, once becoming a Buddhist nun, she is finally, gone through the Nợ Ba Sinh, her death, the 3 incarnation that it's paid off, and that she. So relating back to the reason that for the past 10 years or so, I have become deeply, deeply interested in Kiều is because I saw how the story itself reflects the history of Vietnam, especially, the modern history that we've been witnesses to. What do you think? It reflects on Nguyễn Du's life for sure, as a lonely talent in a time of a very tumultuous time. But does it reflect upon the history of Vietnam? Every time there's hope, there's a bit of disappointment, and whether if Kiều personifies Vietnam or any Vietnamese who have a deep love for the country, do you feel like there would be something like Kiều, finally getting out of paying her debt to her universe or universal debt, and finally walking away free again?
I have to think of the character in the story and also the country you're talking about. And certainly the difficulties that Vietnam has gone through in modern times might be compared to Thuy Kiew's difficulties. The success of Vietnam of coming through those difficulties might be compared to where she is now. She also ends up a figure of great strength at the end of the story. I think you're right that at least scholars commonly think that Zoot was an incredibly disappointed person. He had taken an oath to the Lê dynasty, and then he served another dynasty, which was similar to what Kiew's doing. Well, you know, she swore a Zuyen with her first lover.
Yep.
She has to deal with that oath before heaven, with another oath that she has given to her by heaven. Yes. She has obligations to family. These are all very complex. I don't know. You really want an American to speculate on Vietnam?
No, I mean, this is someone. You know, I always want to bring Kieu out. You know, because if it's only a story about Vietnam or about Buddhism, and it's not well shared by everyone else, you know, if it's not a universal story with universal theme, then you know the value of it is rather limited. But then, you know, through the eyes and lenses of scholars like you who can do the comparative work, you know, we actually learn more about Nguyễn Du and our culture, our country, than as if we had done that, you know, just limiting everything to Vietnam. And so the students of yours thought that it was not a happy ending because she didn't get married to Kim Trọng at the end, but then she let Thúy Vân to take over for her, and she would still be there in presence, but not as a wife to her old lover, the original person that she proposed or pronounced the Duyên with. But then again, she was freed from all the bondages of the human life. Yeah, and in that sense, it is a happy ending. And for someone like you know, us, the modern Vietnamese, and we can see if we can break away from the traditional bondages, we might even be better off. But this is extremely interesting. So we have about 10 minutes, and I don't know how I would do it, but I would like someone in the audience to ask you questions, or to you know, speak out somehow in Vietnamese or in English. So I'm going to switch to Vietnamese, talking with my participants here, and if anyone is interested, I will ask them to speak up. Mọi người, nếu mà mọi người trong tiếng Anh bạn gấu có bạn nào mà muốn hỏi giáo sư Balaban câu hỏi gì bằng tiếng Việt hoặc bằng tiếng Anh, thì hình như là có nút giơ tay, thì mọi người giơ tay và mình sẽ mở cái unmute để mọi người có thể nói tiếng Việt cũng được hoặc là nói tiếng Anh cũng được, tùy mọi người. Thì hôm nay thì đang nói chuyện về Hồ Xuân Hương, về chuyện Kiều. Nếu mà ai mà có câu hỏi thì có thể giơ tay và mình sẽ mời bạn để nói. Tiếng Việt thì mình sẽ dịch sang tiếng Anh cho giáo sư, và nếu mà tự nói được tiếng Anh cũng không sao cả, và rất là cảm thấy thoải mái tự nhiên. Mời có nghe thấy không ạ? Okay, so I suggested that anyone who has a question can raise their hands, and then they can speak up and talk about it.
Actually, I'm surprised how much of what you said I could understand.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, but
yeah. So if we don't have anyone asking the question, let's talk a little bit about the theme of Buddhism in Nguyễn Du's work with Văn Tế Thập Loại Chúng Sinh and Chuyện Kiều. You know, again, if you want to delve a bit deeper, more deeply into the how no, Nguyễn Du came across surprisingly as a Buddhist understander or scholar, because when I read Văn tế tập loại chúng sinh, the theme of Buddhism is it's just so strong. It could have only come from a very devoted Buddhist soul. So we have 7 more minutes, and Professor Balaban, Uncle John, feel free to educate us.
I was looking for a word. There's a Japanese term. It's called akirami.
Akirami, yeah.
It's translated as brave composure that is based on a sense of the powerlessness of the self.
Oh.
Based on the notion of the powerlessness of the self, but in Bushido, the warrior way,
yeah,
powerlessness and ultra power. In other words, when you have a full sense of your powerlessness, your power is ultimate.
That's deep.
That's deep. My students have trouble with that notion too. So do I. But I think William Zhu was working on the edges of that notion. I mean, he was working with resignation, Buddhist resignation. And he also must have seen it as a source of strength. And I think he was writing about using Kyu, how one can lead be forced into a dirty life, but how one can improve that life, and that if you look for outside help, it's not really going to be there. The help has to come from inside. And that being, say, socially powerless isn't necessarily a defeat at all. You can gain strength from it, if that makes any sense.
So by giving up the sense of power, trying not to control your life and the outcomes or things beyond your control, you give up total control, and you understand that you are powerless. Nguyễn Du still had a little bit of yearning for being remembered. One of his verses goes, he asked if 300 years later, if anyone would still cry for him. So that was a soul that was seeking confirmation, understanding, being sympathized with, and is it a sense of weakness or is it a sense of strength?
I think he had a sense of strength. I mean, the Buddhist notion is grasping, right? One of the main source of all our pain is trying to grab something and hold on to it.
Yes.
And to grab onto material things or worldly fame, equally troublesome for the individual. If you can let it go, one's strength is enhanced, I suppose. I mean, he wasn't a weak person. I mean, even when he was working for the new dynasty after the Lei, he still was sent to China as Vietnam's ambassador. Yep. He still spoke for the country at the Chinese court.
Yes.
And when he retired, he was given a title, I think it was something, it translates as Pillar of the Nation. Pillar of the Nation. And of course, we are reading him 300 years.
That's right, and we still love him. As I get older, I become I synchronize much better with him, and I can see another 3 years from now that we Vietnamese will still be discussing his concerns and yearnings and longings and whatnot again. Nguyễn Du was not cowardly, because in the story of Kiều, and unmistakably Từ Hải depicts Nguyễn Huệ, and for him to talk about Nguyễn Huệ like that was that could have brought him death, but luckily it didn't. Yeah, so that's a sense of bravery that he had to hide. We have 3 minutes left. Do you any messages that you want to broadcast to our participants, and through our participants to your Vietnamese friends, who will get to know you through this video? Do you want to say something to them about Nom, about What is the best way, in your opinion, that for us to look back into history and preserve our ancient culture? What kind of messages you have for us?
Well, I'm not suggesting that people learn true Nom. It's too difficult, but you don't have to. Go to our website and look at the things. For instance, we have 5 different versions of Kieu on our website, along with scholarly notes. All this is available in modern Vietnamese. So take a look at the Vietnamese Nom Preservation Foundation. We offer a free dictionary of True Nom if you're curious about words. And I think no one is trying to resurrect 18th century Vietnam.
That's right.
But no one wants to lose things. You know, right now in the United States, we can't even remember what happened here 200 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Our history, our Constitution, our founders, they seem to be items of confusion in our own world at the moment. So that website offers a look into the past that might be useful.
That's wonderful. I feel like today, within the same duration of time, we actually got to speak a lot more about things that matter. So the dress rehearsal yesterday was in the end turned out to be necessary, and it helps improve the quality of today's talk. On behalf of the course participants and myself, I just want to thank you again for your time. Your willingness to step in to help us and educate us about things that we care deeply about, you know, as modern Vietnamese. And again, we are committed to supporting the work of the foundation.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So, and no, thanks to you, because as a the national uncle. So as they say in Vietnam these days, that you know, thanks for your love and passion for Vietnam. And on behalf of the course, thank you again, and I wish you all the best. We are coming up very closely to the end of the video, and so Godspeed and goodbye, Professor Balaban. We will be in touch.
Good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.